Matthias Thorpe, resist Marxism, and up to $100,000 reward for identifying Antifa attackers. Get ready for some thought-provoking dialogue, folks. If you don't know and you're wondering why Matthias looks like this, see my last video and or the one before that. See the links below. But know that there is a $10,000 reward for identifying each individual who attacked Matthias, and there are an estimated 6 to 10 attackers. Almost certainly Antifa of a particular chapter, so to speak. See this video for details on that. So that's up to $100,000, or perhaps more if there are more than 10 attackers. For details on this reward, see the third link below. Now let's get into it. So can you tell me, first of all, what, if any, connection do you have with the Boston Free Speech people?
So we are two organizations. We're Resist Marxism, and then there's the Boston Free Speech.
Right.
And so the Boston Free Speech group started this movement, and they started doing the rallies in May. So they did the first free speech rally in May, and then the one that they're most famous for in August, where 45,000 people showed up to protest, and they didn't have a clue as to what they were actually protesting.
Right, and that's one of the things that I went after journalists for, because they wouldn't even show who was speaking. You know, you had Shiva, I'm sure, you had a bunch of people on it. It was such a colorful stage. And they wouldn't show that on the news. So I went after all the reporters that called it alt-right, far-right, white supremacist, white nationalist, and I called and called and called to go after those people. I don't think I got any of them on the phone for that particular one, but I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. So yeah, I started after the August rally, after I saw the hysteria.
I'm sorry, I dropped my microphone here.
Oh.
Drop my microphone.
Are you good?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right, cool.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. So yeah, in August, I started the kind of research stage of trying to figure out who spoke at this meeting, what these people were talking about, and I just sort of propelled myself into the, I would say, right-wing movement. And I started listening to so many people and so many different ideas, and I was like, wow, these people are explaining these things in such a good way, and I understand where they're coming from. And then I started seeing just the insanity from Antifa, and then I think I actually saw your videos about Berkeley Antifa
Cool.
when that happened. So I started getting involved with a group called Resist Marxism, which was actually started by Kyle Chapman. And his idea, as far as I know, I'm not the main organizer, but we're trying to figure out how to structure ourselves into a national chapter and then into different branches along the, around the United States. And so Kyle Chapman started this movement as a way to resist kind of the tyrannical fascist mobs that were trying to shut down different right-wing events. And so we decided that we would have a rally back in November called the Rally for the Republic. We wanted to do it on Veterans Day as kind of a patriotic rally to celebrate our veterans, especially after the whole, flag kneeling NFL conspiracy thing.
Yeah.
So the Boston Parks and Recreation, they didn't really approve of us meeting on certain dates because I guess some of them were already taken. And we had a pretty hard struggle trying to get approval for the following weekend that said that it was available. And so we actually ended up having our rally without a permit. So we met on the Boston Common on November 18th without a permit, and we sort of forced the police to actually treat us as if we had a permit.
Okay,
so they set up a cage, they set up their police force, and everything was kind of taken care of as if we were a permanent event. But they tried to stop us because there was another group that was meeting on the other side of the Common, and they try to use that as an excuse to try to use their bureaucracy to stop us.
Okay.
Because they said, oh, can't you just move it to the next day and then we'll give you a permit? And it's like, no, you took a month to respond to us. We've already gotten our, we'd been fighting with them for weeks trying to figure out how we get this permit. And then it wasn't until a month afterwards that they denied the permit and then said that they would offer a permit for the next day. And we'd already planned for Joey Gibson to come out, for Tiny Tusa to come out.
My name is Tusitala Joshua. Go try and dox that.
Patriot Prayer guys.
Yeah.
Kyle Chapman was flying out. So we had a lot of money invested into this. So it's just like, their policy was to create. Basically, they're supposed to accept or deny a permit within 10 days of the creation and of the application.
Okay.
And they didn't do that. And so they gave us the runaround, and eventually we said, you know what, we're just going to meet there without a permit. We're allowed to assemble, freedom of assembly. They tried to stop our amplification. We did it anyways. And they decided that they would just treat it as a normal event. So a lot of the people on the opposing side didn't like that too much, because of course everybody still thought we were Nazis.
Of course.
And, why do Nazis get special privileges but we don't?
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a lot of arguments.
I'm from the island of American Samoa. I'm 21 years old, and I got a message for you. You guys are the so-called anti-fascists. You ain't. You are anti-First Amendment. You are anti-fucking American. That's what you are. The real anti-fascists are standing here. We don't stand with white supremacists. We don't stand with neo-Nazis. But I'm going to tell you this. Any of you white people come up to me and say you're guilty of being white, you're dumb as hell. Be proud of being white. Be proud of being brown. Be proud of being black. Whatever color you are. You didn't have a choice. If I had a choice, I'll tell God, create me and make me purple. Then you guys can fight about racism. We need to stand up. We need to unite as a country. We want to make America great again. We got to come together. We, the people, have more power than the people that's in power. Why do we have more power? If we stand together as one. But what you guys are doing, you guys want to come out here and shut people down, that's a fascist ideology. Grow the hell up. We ain't going to back down. You guys want to come out here and try to shut us down? We're going to have to come out every single day. If it takes 5,000 rallies, we're still going to be out here. You've been doing this for the longest time. The only reason why we're out here, because we're pissed off and we ain't going to see this country burn to the ground. And I'm going to tell you something. Your little Civil War on November 4th, I flew from Washington all the way here. I didn't see no Civil War. Why? Because y'all stupid as hell. Grow the hell up. We're going to keep on standing. We're going to keep on standing, and we're never going to give up. We're never going to give up. Why? Because I'd rather die on my feet than living on my knees. And real American will understand what I'm saying. So keep on coming out, and we're going to keep on standing. Red, white, and blue all the way. God bless America.
But anyways, we had the rally for the Republic, and that's how I was sort of pointed out as a major contributing figure by the Antifa groups.
Right.
They got a picture of me when I showed up to their... So they had a press conference for their counter-protest.
Okay.
And so me and another organizer showed up, didn't do anything, just listened, filmed. These people were harassing us, were saying a lot of different things to us, harassing the press, because the press wanted to interview us after the fact. And they put our pictures online, and they tried to dox me.
Yeah. And
so they couldn't figure out who I was for the longest time. And it wasn't until this night that the group came out of the bookstore and assaulted me.
So we're talking now December 1st after Mark Bray's talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they kind of what a lot of people are saying is they had a hit on me. So they wanted to take me out, And whether that be trying to dox me, trying to publish my, information. But the thing is I'm unemployed right now, so so in terms of trying to get rid of me from a place of work,
Right on, man.
it doesn't, it's not going to matter.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it might affect applying for jobs, but I'm not really that worried about it.
Yeah, and also, everyone at home, don't worry. Give it a couple years, and Antifa will be people will look back and see Antifa for what it really is. So all these people that are trying to contact employers and say that you're a neo-Nazi and blah blah blah, just give it a little while, and it will be commonly known to your average American that this was another moral panic, just like the Red Scare, McCarthyism, the Satanic Panic of the 80s, etc., etc. It's just another one of those, and people will know that pretty darn soon. I mean, half the people already know it, the other half will know it pretty soon. So not to worry, everybody. Don't worry. Stand up against Antifa, okay? All these people in Antifa, by the way, they are going to be remembered by history as being part of the lynch mob, basically. So don't worry, everybody.
Yeah, a lot of people are saying that, the left is going to eat itself.
Yeah.
That they're kind of, they're kind of heading towards the cliff.
Yep.
And some people will say, well, why even bother with them? Why even, do anything? And a little part of me is kind of like, well, I'd be afraid that maybe they might turn around away from the cliff at some point.
Sure, yeah.
But I say, you know what? We need to start just nudging them towards that cliff maybe a little sooner.
Yeah.
And challenging what they believe, standing up to their academic, I call them the intelligentsia, that sort of brainwashes the population.
Sure.
People like Mark Gray, other academic professors who come. I actually went to a meeting of teachers at UMass Boston, and they had a conversation about free speech, and their whole sort of philosophy, it seemed like in the room, was if you have an idea that doesn't match up with what we stand for, then we need to somehow, get you to re-educate yourself into what we're thinking. So they were like, oh, we'll let you speak and we'll let you express freely, but we need to make sure that the teachers are going to interfere with the learning process and try to get them on board with, what we think is right and what we think is supposed to be the ideal. And just the fact that I was challenging a lot of their beliefs of, white privilege and social justice. And they seemed a little bit in shock after I said the things that I said. And I was just mostly talking, Ben Shapiro talking points. Okay. And also just my own talking points before I even got into or even knew people who were talking about social justice. Yeah. So, they kind of looked at me and said, you're sort of outnumbered here. And it's like, it was almost like, how do you believe the things that you believe when you've got a room of people in here that says that social justice is an academic fact? Right. And, and it's almost like using that academic power, that idea. So,
and also it's a psychological trick. I don't know. Have you ever seen the experiment? It's a very commonly reproduced experiment they show you in like introduction to psychology courses, where they get a room full of people. Most of them are actually in on the experiment, and then they have a couple volunteers who don't know what's going on. They enter a room, and they're asked a simple question. I don't know what, but let's just, sticking with Orwellian stuff. Let's say it's, what is 2 + 2? And all the people who are in on it will say 5. And then they'll see what the volunteer would do. They're studying whether or not the volunteer will just go along with it, or whether he'll persist in saying, no, it's 4. And, they try, the people in the room try to pressure him into, saying it's 2 + 2 is 5. They'll interview the people afterwards. Why did you go along with it, or why did you not go along with it? And, it's a commonly reproduced psychological experiment. But the point is, your average person will go along with it, even though they know it's wrong.
The Asch experiment is one of psychology's oldest and most popular pieces of research. A volunteer is told that he's taking part in a visual perception test. What he doesn't know is that the other participants are actors, and he's the only person taking part in the real test, which is actually about group conformity.
Please begin. The experiment you will be taking part in today involves the perception of line length. Your task will be simply to look at the line here on the left and indicate which of the 3 lines on the right is equal to it in length. So, for example, if you...
The actors have been told to match the wrong lines. The volunteer will be monitored to see if he gives the correct answer or if he goes along with the opinion of the group and gives the wrong answer. In the first test, the correct answer is 2.
1. 1. 1. 2. 1.
Once again, the correct answer is 2.
3. 3. 3. 3.
3.
The Asch experiment has been repeated many times, and the results have been supported again and again. We will conform to the group. Again, we're very social creatures. We're very much aware of what the people around us think. We want to be liked. We don't want to be seen to rock the boat, so we will go along with the group, even if we don't believe what people are saying.
Okay, so that was the Asch conformity experiment, sometimes called the Asch experiment. And here's a similar experiment, but involving more pressure, danger, or the illusion thereof.
We've planted 7 actors who are all in on the experiment. We've said to them, when you see the smoke, do nothing. Our second participant is Lauren Heffernan, also a student. What will she do?
In this situation, she'll be following a script. The script is partly written in her mind. It's a script which is borrowed from things like sitting exams. Most situations like this have some element of expected or scripted behaviour.
But what will happen to her script when we make a slightly unusual situation very unusual? Nothing to start with, so we get her attention.
Now, while you watch this, think of the fire as representing some other threats, say, for example, the encroachment upon freedom of speech, the regressive left, Antifa, what they're doing there in Berkeley, the way that the governments are colluding with Antifa. The fire could represent Islam, any sort of impending doom that people just want to deny by hiding their head in the sand.
How long before she dashes out of the room?
She's checking increasingly to see what the other people are thinking, but who can she appeal to? The answer is nobody. She turns to the norm of the group: ignore the smoke. In a real fire, the people in this group would be in very serious danger by now.
I was looking for some sort of reaction from someone else, even just the slightest little thing, that they'd recognise that there was something, you know, going on here. For me to kind of react on that and then do something about it, I kind of needed prodding.
She's waiting for someone else to react. Why isn't anyone else reacting? She feels uncomfortable. She doesn't want to embarrass herself by taking the lead, taking action. But something is definitely wrong.
Lauren stayed in the room for 20 minutes after spotting the smoke, concerned but immobile. The fire brigade say that if this fire had been real, even if flames hadn't burnt through the door, she would have died of asphyxiation in this time. In the end, we had to ask her to leave.
What about him? Thanks. I was surprised that I didn't do anything at all. I was just literally waiting. I just thought that someone else is surely going to say something soon. And because no one else did, I just didn't react at all.
We tried the experiment 10 times, and the same thing happened over and over again. If the person was on their own, they left quickly. If they were in a group of 3 or more, they stayed, rooted to the spot. The average length of time they stayed, 13 minutes.
Okay, notice that when a subject is alone in the room, they tend to react rationally and immediately to the impending doom. However, when they are not alone, they tend to go along with everyone else. Now, think about it this way. If you just get a person alone who doesn't know about social pressure and pressure from the media and all that kind of stuff, and you present them the doctrine of Islam and the actions of Muslims who, well, commit terrorism, yes, I know, not all, but those that do, they would react rationally to that. But since we're all embedded in the society and immersed in the media environment in which this is denied, just like the people pretending there's no smoke coming out that door, people tend to go along with it, because they actually fear disapproval of other people, even strangers, more than they fear fire. People have the courage to say Antifa is wrong, Islam is not okay, etc., and so on. Moving on.
And that's kind of one of these things that sort of scares me, is the people who are going to stand up against the status quo are often very limited in society. Because, I often try to encourage people to, stand up against what they think is, or what is the status quo, and to kind of challenge that idea of, there's many different types of things I could get into. I mean, it's a long conversation, I think, but just, when you look at social media, for example, a lot of people get on social media because it's cool, and they start getting entrapped in kind of this, obsession of what other people are doing and what is going on in other people's lives, instead of just trying to be themselves and try to, I think it was Ralph Waldo Emerson who actually said, like, the greatest man is the one who, like, basically in the spotlight does what he does in the privacy of his own room.
Okay.
So
Nice.
basically, exposing yourself in a true way, in an honest way, in the eyes of others, instead of trying to hold back maybe your thoughts and feelings and opinions that you might hold, in secret.
Right on, man. Yeah. I mean, be
So
true to yourself.
yeah. So yeah, that's kind of one thing, it's like we have to fight back. We have to go to these meetings. We have to go to these places. I've gone to many of these different events. I've always been kind of met with hostility. The first time I went to a protest event, it was a anti-Betsy DeVos protest, and I held up a sign because I guess Betsy DeVos came to Harvard and
Who is that?
was
Can you
speaking.
explain who that is?
She's the Secretary of Education, I think.
Okay.
And she's basically doing a lot of work in terms of freedom of choice, is what she says. So people can choose schools that they want to go to. And she's trying to kind of build up, I think, charter schools.
Right.
And there's a lot of resistance from the progressive side.
Of course. 'Cause how can you re-educate them in a uniform manner collectively if everybody's got different alternatives?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of trying to work on an idea of bringing about a group of people in the likes of kind of like the Greeks, where they had their forums and they had kind of their lyceums, their
Nice.
schools.
Right.
And trying to bring people around to talk about things where there's not necessarily a lecturer or a professor. You just kind of, I think it starts off as kind of like a book discussion group, but it can also kind of turn into a discussion of just ideas.
Right.
If you have an idea that you want to assess with it. But that's one thing that really frustrates me, I think, about society is we often focus on what's not important.
Oh, yeah.
And I think a lot of it is not always the fault of the individual. I mean, it is and it isn't. It is because we all have individual responsibility to do certain things, but there's also an attack, I think, on the mind and on people through many distractions.
Okay.
Technology is a great thing, but it's also a destructive one in terms of people's desire for knowledge, but also people's lack of wisdom.
Well, have you heard the term bread and circus from late Roman era? It's just a term basically, it just also basically means that it was a policy. At a certain point, they had so much wealth coming in because of their, let's say, colonization or imperialism of other lands, that your average citizen could, your average citizen could no longer get work because they had a lot of people being brought in, a lot of slave labor. So your average person couldn't get any work. So then, to basically keep the populace happy and to prevent revolution from happening, they gave them bread and circus. In other words, everybody got fed, and everybody could go see the Coliseum
Entertained.
games. Entertainment. So today, the circus is our technology, of course, our TV, our internet, etc. And, bread and circus. So, but the thing is, to go back to the point that you made initially there, the bread and circus is coming from the authority itself. Yes, but if the individual didn't, want that, then it wouldn't work. So it's coming from both the individual and from the outside authority.
Exactly. People make their own choices, and when you look about fighting against these things, I kind of, I think one of the biggest sort of philosophical kind of takes on the idea of like consumerism, I think is like Fight Club. and
In
sort of
what way?
their take. Well, I think their take on it is kind of like this idea that they rebelled against a system of control in terms of material objects.
Oh, okay, yeah. So
But
the whole
they
scene
kind
with
of,
the IKEA catalog and everything. Yeah,
yeah.
okay. So it's a stifling thing. Okay.
And so in the book, they sort of they have a more extreme reaction to this. I mean, their reaction is we need to disassemble the entire thing. We need to destroy it completely. And I think that you have these two approaches when it comes to, you know, sort of ideologies that people think are harmful and bad. You have sort of this, like, we need to get rid of it, we need to destroy it.
Okay.
But then I think there's also this idea of, well, maybe we need to encourage the individual to destroy it within themselves.
Oh, sure.
To, you know, and I think that's kind of the best idea, because, like I said, taking like extreme action like that often can hurt a lot of innocent people and often doesn't go as well as people planned.
Well, definitely, and I think, and you really hit the nail on the head with something I think is so important in it, and it's just underlies all this stuff with Antifa and the free speech movement, or however you want to put it. It's that if you do not start the quote-unquote revolution or the transformation from the inside out, it will never work. I mean, first of all, you got to subvert the own authority, the own hierarchy in your head. We all have, whether we realize it or not, we all have, you know, let's say in Freudian terms, the super ego. We all, even when we're thinking, most of us, not every one of us, we're thinking in terms of, what would the Sky Daddy think of that thought that I just had? Or my own father, or my own mother, or whatever the case may be. It's kind of, these things are all combined into one. The society itself, say, social justice warriors, what would they think? You know, so we all have this hierarchy in our head that we have to subvert first. And we also have to get rid of our own hatred. Look, if you're looking out in the world and saying, there's Nazis everywhere and there's hatred everywhere, you're projecting a lot of that out there, and that means it's inside of you and you're denying it, and you have to work on that first, and that's how it has to start. If every individual really were to truly transform themselves from the inside out, we wouldn't need to sort of be out there in the streets screaming for like change and saying, you know, the 99% or the 1%, etc., etc. We wouldn't need any of that.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult in this climate right now, because you have a group of people who are trying to shut these people's minds. You know, they're basically trying to censor. They're not only trying to censor us, but they're trying to censor these people from hearing other ideas.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why it's so scary, is because these people who tend to kind of fall into, I guess, people who are Marxists or socialists are often, you know, at least in this climate, not the reasonable ones, you know, not the ones that are like, oh, okay, I kind of like what Marx has to say, but I realize I can't force everybody to kind of, you know, do this.
Right.
But maybe this is just one piece of the puzzle in order to somehow create a better society.
Right.
And, yeah, that's why we're getting to a point where it's like, you know, as you saw, I tried to go to this meeting, and my whole purpose is, like I said, is to ask questions. And when people hear these questions, to hopefully bring about a light bulb in the minds.
Yeah.
And it does happen. It definitely does happen.
Sure.
And yeah, at the same time, being able to maybe talk to the people who are participating in these events. But we are having a huge resistance when it comes to rallies and protests, and even just, you know, lectures and group meetings. I mean, I went to a meeting about Intro to Marxism and for the Democratic Socialists of America, and I asked some really tough questions. And the guy seemed like he was kind of able to answer it, but he was like this older sort of hippie guy, and we probably could have had like a 3-hour-long discussion, to be honest.
Right.
But I could definitely tell that a lot of the people in that room didn't seem to fully understand the whole entire, you know, conversation.
Right.
At the end of the event, I was talking to somebody in that room who made a good point about capitalism and kind of the idea that, you know, when a economic system fails, like, or not system, but a society like we've had the Great Depression, for example, we've always been able to build ourselves back up from that in capitalistic societies. But in a socialist or communist society, it becomes much more difficult.
Oh, sure.
And I wanted to talk to him about that because, like, I'm not an expert when it comes to socialism, communism. I have a very, like, hierarchical, top-level view of it. I know what the plan is. I know, like I'm talking with you, I know that, you sort of have to sacrifice certain people who don't fit into your agenda to kind of create this utopian society. But when it comes to, like, the really
like the
deep...
kulaks.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when it comes to, like, the deep theory, to be able to have, like, a really technical conversation with somebody, I'm probably not at that level. But at the end of this conversation, I was trying to talk with him to kind of learn that, to understand sort of what my opponents are arguing. And I was kind of pulled to the side by these two girls, and one was talking to me pretty reasonably, but the other came up to me and started interrogating me and started saying me, like, asking me, what's your political compass? Why are you here?
Right.
The questions that you're asking, they're all like, stupid right-wing talking points.
Yeah.
And I was just like, calm down. Like,
yeah.
And I talked to her and I said, am I not the person that you want to, somehow, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess convert to your movement. Mm-hmm. Like, if you can't be strong in your ideas and convert me,
right,
then it's like, and she's like, well, should we just be out seeking right-wing people to convert? I said, well, you should be willing to at least talk to these people, because who knows what they're going to think. And also at the same time, I said, I think that by talking with people who you oppose, like vehemently oppose, you start to become stronger in your own ideas, and you start building your own foundations.
Yes, sir.
And so she didn't want to talk to me. She kept trying to, like, shut me up and shut me down. And it's just, this is the tactic that these people are using.
Yeah, and when they
to try to get rid of people who could potentially impact their little group.
Yeah, yeah. And when their response to the information or ideas or questions that you're asking is, wait a minute, how can I just sort of disqualify everything you're saying by pointing to you and saying, the whole ad hominem fallacy. Can I just point to this person and say, oh, wait a minute, this person's an alt-righter, so therefore I don't have to think about what they're asking or saying. That's the clue. When somebody does that, they're pretty much already lost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's because they're in this intellectual bubble. Trying to pierce that bubble, I think, has been so difficult for people who are on the right.
Yep.
And that's why it makes me think about the fact is, are we wasting our time? Is there going to be a sort of breaking point where all this sort of kind of turns into some sort of physical confrontation, in society? Is there going to be a battle between, and I hate to use the left-right, sort of analogy, because I don't like putting people in boxes,
right,
but it's just the only way I can kind of talk about the current climate right now.
Right.
It's almost like, are you on this side or are you on this side? And if you're in the middle, then it's almost like you're sort of forced to have to turn to one side.
Oh, sure.
And I'm getting really worried about this because, like, we just saw in the last few days the Supreme Court approved the travel ban. Trump is trying to establish Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. He's doing a lot of things that the people who would consider themselves on the left, really oppose.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why we're seeing a higher instance of violence now, is because I think there's a huge amount of success happening on the right. And, people are just not knowing what to do. People are not understanding how to peacefully resist anymore. And it's like, well, you could have probably peacefully resisted a long time ago, and we probably could have had a good discussion and probably could have, improved the world in a better way. Right. But we're sort of forced to this, I think, kind of, I call it the very strict sort of, Trump is this guy, he's kind of like, he lays his fist down and it's done.
Yeah.
And I sort of disapprove of that often. When it comes to the wall, it's like, do we have to have this wall to separate us? I understand it really helps keep really bad people out. But it's like, and with the travel ban, it's like, do we have to, like, just say nobody from those areas? Is there really no potential to somehow improve our systems, to make sure that, you know, bad people come out.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you on that, by the way. I'm not a Trump supporter, but people on the right totally accept that from me. Whereas people on the left don't accept me not believing every paranoid conspiracy theory about Trump.
Yeah,
Which
if
is
one of
really
these
weird.
people, if one of these people, you know, we have a guy who considers himself a socialist who's marched with us before.
Okay.
And we disagree on a lot of different things, but when it comes to free speech, we think that free speech should be something that's protected.
Right.
So it's like, you know, you have to find common ground with people. And I think that's very easy to do with anybody who draws the line at violence. So it's like once you draw the line at violence, I think, you know, even when it comes to a lot of people want to disavow the white nationalist and alt-right or whatever groups. But I think when you're a civic nationalist, there is some overlapping discussion areas between, I think, what the alt-right is trying to accomplish and what kind of the civic nationalist Trump supporter is trying to accomplish.
Now, could you explain what a civic nationalist is? Because to tell you the truth, I've heard the term before. I have no idea what it is. And by the way, the term alt-right to me means so many different things to so many different people. But anyway, can you explain what a civic nationalist is?
Sure. From my interpretation, a civic nationalist is somebody who wants to basically create a nation state. So you want to take care of your people first, and you want to, it's not saying that you don't trade with other countries, but I think when you're a nationalist, it's sort of like a type of patriotism. You sort of have a love for your country, and you sort of want to do what's best for your country before anybody else.
So it's civic nationalism, is it opposed to the ethno-nationalist idea that everybody should be homogenous ethnically in that actual nation? Or is there an overlap, or does civic nationalism allow for ethno-nationalism, or no?
I say that civic nationalism ends at the ethno-state. So when you're a civic nationalist, basically you don't care what race, what ideology. I think you can also be a civic nationalist, like, you know, for example, we were talking about the Amish community. They sort of adhere to a Christian value system.
Sure.
I think you can still be a civic nationalist and at least embrace the fact that you would like, you know, some sort of traditionalism or some sort of, you know, Christian theocracy as at least a guiding light to some sort of, you know, it's not necessarily, you know, there's still separation of church and state,
right.
But when it comes to a value system that you sort of adhere to, okay. I think civic nationalists still do kind of, you can attach yourself to that ideology.
Right,
but I'm actually
like
still...
you said, separation of church and state, so as long as there's that there, I'm totally okay with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Trump is like I said, a civic nationalist, an American nationalist. I'm still, like, I just kind of heard about this term recently, so I'm still trying to understand it completely myself. Okay. But as far as what I know, when people say that they're a nationalist, it just means that they're a civic nationalist. I think Poland is a country that's kind of very civic, is a civic nationalist country. They tend to be, of course, ethnically homogenous. But I think that's just, you know, I don't necessarily know if that's, you know, really a alt-right type of talking point or a, you know, ethno-state type of talking point. Okay. But, you know, there are some ideas about demographics and how demographics affect different things. But it's very complex, I think. And the thing about the alt-right is, so the alt-right to me is people who ascribe to a white nationalist identity. But I think it can also be people who maybe they draw the line at, you know, maybe they don't necessarily like the idea of a white ethno-state, but maybe they like the idea of like a cultural ethno-state, I guess. Maybe that's what I'm getting at when I talk about, you know, this idea of, you know, sort of a Christian, you know, nation state, sort of adhering to a set of ideas. I think also looking at a certain set of demographics when it comes to how different cultures work together. But yeah, it's a lot, and I haven't even really delved down what I call the forbidden zone.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I think a lot of people will look at when you start talking about race and IQ and you start talking about demographics and how different types of races sort of think about others and think about themselves. Like one talking point I've heard of is like, so in the United States, a lot of minorities tend to collectivize themselves and sort of look out for their collective kind of community.
La Raza, for example.
Yeah. And when we look at kind of, white people, I don't think that you really know of anybody who's white and says they're trying to do stuff that's better for the, white race or whatever. But
well, they exist, but...
They do exist, and I think that's the argument, is like a lot of people are saying, oh, well, you're already the dominant people in this structure.
Right.
There's more white people than us, so why should you have your own advocacy group or whatever? And I don't know what I think about it. Like I said, I do not like collectivism based on race. I would actually like there to be, when it comes to like LGBTQT, and when we're looking at Black Lives Matter, Black Caucus, all these different organizations that target an ethnic or sexual identity.
Yeah.
I think that those can be extremely dangerous because you're excluding people, you're excluding people that don't necessarily fit into that ideology. And also, I think Jordan Peterson talks about this point too when he talks about like the transgender community. He says one of the points is like, your community is not necessarily democratically elected. So how am I supposed to know that you talk for the entire community?
Right, just because you have a certain skin color or persuasion or orientation, yeah.
So I think that a lot of people who would be civic nationalists, or even just people who are just regular political, have regular political ideologies, would say, I don't really like the fact that there is a group that somehow serves the Black community and somehow knows how to serve the Black community, because not all these people think alike. They're all certain individuals.
Sure.
So it's an idea of, I think, collectivizing around a value system that's sort of a patriotic value system as opposed to anything that's based on race or ethnicity.
And as Maji Nawaz says, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he considers himself a liberal in the classical sense. Over there in England, liberal still means what it actually means in the dictionary as opposed to over here in America. But he considers himself to be a classical liberal or social liberal, just liberal Muslim reformist. And so he gets hate from all different sides, but he often talks about how this identity politics that you're talking about ends up inevitably oppressing the minority within the minority. So the gay Muslim suffers, or the trans Muslim suffers, or the female Muslim suffers because of this whole identity politics that, all Muslims are stuck into one box, which is ridiculous. Or all LGBTQ people are stuck in one box, which is ridiculous. And you notice that especially over there in California, there are so many transgender individuals who are in with the free speech side.
Yeah.
And they talk about how they don't like how they're being told that because they're a trans person or whatever, that they have to fit in this little box and agree with everybody else because they're being told to, and that's just bullshit. And here's a little quick thing. If you identify as your ethnicity or as your gender or as you really don't have much of an individual identity. Just identify as an individual, man.
Yeah, exactly. When people, come out and say, well, I'm a non-binary, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And I'm just like, cool, cool, bro. Bye, So it's just like, yeah, when people say that, it's like, I think it's because they don't have, like you said, they don't have a sense of self-identity. They don't have a sense of, I think, self-esteem to be able to say, I have these characteristics that are other than my, other than how I was born or other than some sexual orientation that I identify as.
Yeah.
And not being able to look upon, well, maybe I'm a good artist, or maybe I'm, a good thinker, or maybe I'm this. So yeah, it's I think frustrating to people when you kind of look at critical race theory and intersectionality and a lot of these things. It's just like people just want to get away from the talk of race. Like, I feel like it's been shoved down our throats so much that it's just like, can we just treat each other as individuals and just treat each other as regular people and just freaking live in society. Yes, there's racism in society, but at the same time, by blaming people and by shoving it down your throats, you're not going to do anything about it. Just by stating, this is again Shapiro, by stating racism, you're not helping to fight against racism.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, you seem, even though they beat your face badly and everybody could see, and by the way, the few people on Reddit or whatever is saying that this was fake, you're idiots. Look at the man. Just look at Matthias. I mean, you know, you jumped on with me on video at a moment's notice, within a few moments' notice. Same thing with Alex Jones the other day. You don't have a team of people doing makeup on you. You were, that wasn't, the hospital room was not a movie set. The doctor who came into the room, or the MD or whatever that came into the room, is not an actor. This is real, folks, okay?
Yeah. I think some people do that just to piss you off. Like, honestly, I wonder if those people actually believe that it's fake, or if they just do that as sort of a trolling type of maneuver.
Well, you never can tell 100%.
Yeah.
You know, but
it's kind of like, that's one situation where, you know, where I talk about, like, you know, people who do things that are a little bit like dark humor type of situations. That's like one situation where it's like, come on, man, like, I've got my face beat in, like, severely, and you're sort of making these jokes, you know, like, I could definitely appreciate a joke of, like, you know, man, your face definitely, you know, can take a beating. And it's like, yeah, okay, that's funny. But when it comes to, like, this is fake and you're a liar and stuff like that, it's like, just to troll me, or maybe even just to make me feel bad, it's like, man, like, that's kind of messed up. Or even people who say, like, I deserved it.
Right.
And it's like, I deserved 10 people, you know, 7 to 10 people to surround me and beat me in the face. Like,
for what? For bringing up the fact that communism has killed tens of millions of people. That is what triggered them. I mean, I saw the video by, I think it's Rose City Antifa or North Shore Antifa, whatever. It's been released. I've seen the video. I heard the question. And yes, you did mention that you said you characterized communism as fascist. I mean, you're using it in a loose sense of the word. But the brunt of your question is, why should we accept that there are so many more people? Okay, Nazism is bad because millions of people were killed. Yes. Yeah. What about communism that killed so many other people? And he just pushed it off as, wait, are you asking me if communism is the same thing as fascism? No, it's not. Next question. But it's obvious that you mentioning that communism killed tens of millions of people is what triggered people in the room. You heard the shuffling, universal gasps, and etc. And yeah, that's what did it. That's why they attacked you. It's so obvious. And by the way, before I forget, I want to say this, that there are people out there saying, how do you know it was Antifa who attacked me, etc. Okay, let me break this down. Number one, Antifa already says they're not an official organization, and that is true. They're not a legal organization. They don't have, you know, legal recognition as an organization. So it's a congregation of people who come together as a collective according to certain views and in agreement to carry out certain tactics, okay? And we know what those tactics are. The views are a little complicated because they say they're one thing, but they're actually another thing. The tactics, violence. Silence people with violence, okay? Now, what happened is you challenge their views, then you were attacked later. So what is, according to Occam's razor, the most likely explanation, or the simplest explanation, is the most likely explanation, okay? And they were tweeting, or they were sharing the video, the Periscope video. They were saying, here they are, these are the baddies, etc., nudge, nudge, wink, wink, and then you were attacked. So, the most likely explanation is that the people who attacked you would be considered Antifa by Antifa's own definition. So if people have a problem with me saying that you were attacked by Antifa, blame Antifa. Take it up with them. Okay? Yeah,
and just the fact that Chris Bartley, the guy that you spoke with, he shared the videos. He shared the pictures.
Yeah.
And so how? Because there was no big major news article that came out except for the Gateway Pundit.
Right.
So how did North Shore Antifa get the news and information about what had happened? Now, from their write-up, it did seem like they were a little bit unsure as to who exactly attacked. So it seemed like they, when I started reading that first paragraph, I started thinking, maybe they felt a little bad for me.
Now, you mean you're talking about the WordPress from North Shore Antifa? Or
yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So that first, first kind of paragraph, they start talking about, well, we don't exactly know what the extent of the injuries are. And I was just thinking, well, why would you write that? Like, I don't know, it seemed very odd the way they worded it. It almost felt like they were trying to feel compassion or something for how badly I was hurt. But as I read through it, they definitely tried to, again, excuse the behavior. But I had one person say that it seemed like they took responsibility from that article. And then I myself personally don't feel like they necessarily claimed responsibility.
No, they're
they were
pretty
just
good
sort
at
of
plausible
bragging about
deniability.
it.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I was just saying, it seemed like they were just bragging about it.
Yes,
But
yes.
I feel like they would have had a much stronger, I think, write-up about what had happened if they would have been the people that attacked. But there were multiple Antifa groups in that building.
Yes.
North Shore was there. Rosa Negra was there. And there might have been some other, like, more radical political groups in the room as well.
Yeah, now I'm not sure, but I get the impression that North Shore Antifa doesn't know who did it, but I get the impression that the Rosa people may have been on the inside, you know?
That's my lead, is because they were live streaming the event.
Right.
And when you think about the time frame, so think about a group of people, like a group of 7 to 10 people who exited the bookstore an hour after the event ended.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, I think about when people stay for a very long time, what's their motives? Who exactly, how do they associate themselves? And the most likely thing, is that the people who were live streaming or some sort of Antifa organization had stayed for a long time to be able to talk with Mark Bray and to, potentially interview him or to do something else. Because, an hour is a long time to stay in an event after it had already ended.
Yeah.
Like, usually the lecturer or whoever's doing it, they want to get out of there, like, within, I would say, 30 minutes. So, yeah, for them to stay for an hour and talk with this person, it's very likely that it was Antifa. It's also very likely that it was Rosa Negra Antifa, because they have done an interview with him, not necessarily that night. I thought at first it was that night, but I saw on their SoundCloud it was a few days ago. But he associates with them, and it seems like the most recent activity is him talking with them and sharing their tweets, sharing their posts.
Yeah, and by a few days ago, do you mean before or after the talk and the attack?
So this was before the attack. Okay. So they shared the soundbite of the interview the day after, and that's why I was like, oh, I got excited for a moment, because like, oh man, if they did an interview that night,
right,
then it's like they took 20 minutes to do an interview, and the time frame and the timing and everything all lined up to. I was like, oh man, that sounds very likely that they attacked me. But I still, even with the fact that they didn't do that interview that night, I feel like because they have such a close relationship with him, that they're more likely to be one of the last people who exited the building and attacked me.
And certainly any detective would want to ask them questions, if nothing else. I mean, that is certainly a potential motive.
Yeah. I'm working with a detective right now, and he's so of course the Coop, it's owned by Barnes and Noble, and so they've lawyered up, and
oh boy,
yeah. So because they invited somebody who condones violence, and I'm sure that they're not wanting to be sued, but basically in order to release the footage, they have to go to like a they have to go to a subpoena court, and that should only take a few days, to be honest.
Huh. Interesting. Wow. And I would imagine such a big corporation like Barnes & Noble's, I would imagine that they would not want to decide on the ideology and legal risk side, hopefully go more on the cover their own ass side. Yeah.
Well, I saw that a lot of major bookstores have been promoting the book.
Yeah.
I think, do you know Ashton Birdie?
Yeah.
Yeah, so she had posted something about the bookstore on her campus, which also seemed like a Barnes & Noble affiliated store.
Yeah, UC Berkeley. Hi, Ashton, by the way.
So it seems like these bookstores have been promoting, and I can actually send you a picture of one of their displays, which was just like, the message there was so hateful against like European settlers and just white people in general, and people who are, you know, pro-capitalist, because they had the Antifa handbook, they had the No book that was like the anti-Trump book, they had the thing about Native Americans being slaughtered, they had the thing about the African American community being stampeded out, then they had 2 books that said white rage, white trash, and then they had like Bernie's book, and then they had a book about capital. And I was like, are you serious? Like, I talked to the manager too, and well, not manager, but somebody who was working there. And I went over to him, and I'm just like, have you seen this display over here? You know, like this, and we walked over, and he looked at it, and he was, you know, kind of like, I kind of agree with you. I've been, you know, getting a lot of complaints about this, but it's still there. You know, it's been a month, and it's still there. And so I'm just like, I told him, he's like, well, do you want me to take it down? And I'm like, no, I don't want anybody to take it down. I just really wish that you had something more balanced here, because it just seems very hateful against people who are either right-wing or people who actually love their country and want to move past the idea that, you know, there were some wrongs that happened in our past, but everybody has these things. I mean, when you start focusing on the wrongs of Europeans, you have to start focusing on the culture and the climate of other peoples during that time as well.
Yes, and everybody, almost every civilization has blood on its hands. I mean, come on.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. But when you say these things, they don't understand, and they say we're on stolen land, and it's like, well, this land was probably stolen by the Native Americans too. So a lot of them migrated over from Siberia and Russia. So people had free movement at one time, and people decided what countries were created and what countries were conquered through battles and wars.
Yeah, and it happened all over the world.
Yeah, and you know, some people would say we still kind of do that now, and I would agree and disagree at the same time. But, you know, I think that we've at least improved as a society. We've gotten a long way. And, you know, there are injustices in the past, but we need to figure out how to move out of that and sort of look to the future. And it's just a real shame that the only thing that the minority community has to look up to, I think, right now is like a role model, is organizations like Black Lives Matter and organizations like La Raza, and, you know, these things that kind of promote this hatred towards the country that they live in, and hatred towards a certain race of people.
Yeah.
And it's hurting them, I think, worse than it's hurting anybody else. It's really just continuing to enslave them into a victimhood mentality. And it's exactly what it's like what sort of the KKK was doing back in the 60s with violence, but instead this is more of a mental attack on the minority community.
Yeah, so what, do you mean like the way that the KKK would tell each other, look, the reason why you're poor and living in a trailer is because the black man has civil rights now and they're giving money to them in a welfare state and blah, 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 blah. In other words, blame your own situation on the outside group, the out-group. Is that what you're getting at?
Well, and also I think just the physical subversion and the intimidation that sort of that group kind of produced against the minority community to say, you know, don't speak out, don't say anything against the government, or we're going to come in and we're going to hurt you. So it's, like I said, it's less physical intimidation and more of mental brainwashing, I think. And it's happening, I think, with a lot of these different collectivist theories. So when you look at feminism and you know, people, I really hate the idea that when people teach their children and like their daughters that it's scary to go outside at night and to like kind of be afraid. And it's like, okay, you should teach them to use common sense. And it's like, don't walk down a back alley in the middle of the night if you're alone and you realize that you're not, you know, you don't know how to defend yourself.
Yeah.
But again, I have that same exact theory, you know. It's like, I'm not a strong person, you know. You can see my arms; they're not huge.
Right.
So if somebody big tried to attack me in the alley,
Yeah.
or you know, like I had in the middle of the street, 10 people come and attack me, it's like I'm not a big person to be able to defend, you know, somebody stronger than me off. And it's kind of a good thing that, you know, when you look at these Antifa groups, but I've noticed here on the East Coast that the Antifa groups don't seem to be as like big and scary. The West Coast groups, I'm not really sure if they have a lot of like strong. Because you know, when I saw the footage from the, you know, Patriot groups, I guess I would say, Kyle Chapman, a lot of the other people who came to fight against them, you know, they were big guys. And when I looked at the Antifa kids, they were scared. Antifa was very intimidated by this group that came in.
Oh, sure.
So yeah, I've been looking for, you know, people that subscribe to the Antifa movement who I would say are like trained fighters or could probably, you know, really hurt somebody. And I find that it's usually a very small percentage of people who, you know, I would say would be able to fight somebody big or even just fight and really hurt. It's
but
like that.
They do exist, though.
Oh, they do. I mean, I would probably look more to like Black Lives Matter and some of the more like the separatist groups, like the Nation of Islam and some of the other like Black Power, Brown Power, La Raza, you know, some of those groups have some pretty scary looking people in there. And I think because they get a lot of gang members and stuff that sort of join their cause.
Yeah.
But yeah, like when I got attacked that night, and my face got pretty beat in, but I have to say that if it wasn't for the one person, and maybe I'm bragging a little bit, but there was one person in that group that hit really hard. Yeah. I mean, I felt it. And if it wasn't for that person, I might have been able to fight my way out. But yeah, like that person hit me quite a few times in the face, and so I have 3 fractures in my face that I have to get checked out.
Yeah.
And so whoever that was who hit me, I think had actually broken that bone in my face. But it seemed like most of these people are pretty weak, you know, because when I was getting hit and stuff like that, like, yeah, I didn't feel good, but it seemed like the only major one that I was like really feeling was just the one person.
Yeah, and who knows? I mean, who knows what that is? I do know that there's been recent efforts, and by recent I mean like for the last 4 or 5 months, by Antifa to go out and to try to recruit people from, let's say, the more tough gang, lower income areas to, you know, basically be their lackey. So I don't know if you saw, there is a video release. I'm not sure who put it out, but I released it on my own channel. But I forget who originally took it, but Ashton, that you mentioned earlier, was in a car. And this was outside of, I think, the August 27th thing in Berkeley, perhaps. If not, it was something around that time. They went to a little gas station outside, and they were approached by what seemed to be more of inner-city people. You know, they have this certain inflection dialect that says that they were for more of the lower income area outside of Berkeley, and they approached their car and they're like, "We're hungry for white supremacists," or something like that.
That was pretty scary,
so, you know,
to be
the video
honest.
I'm talking about. So that may be an example. I mean, obviously, well, not obviously, but I would bet money that the people who approached their car in that video were not, let's say, an Eric Clanton professor, cultural Marxist, bourgeoisie, pampered, etc., yada yada type person. So they are reaching out to those people, and in some cases it seems like they've brought some of those people in. And also BAMN, they intentionally reach out to, you know, just say the disenfranchised black youth, Hispanic youth, and etc. They go for that. They want that up in the up front. So for example, in March 15th, I believe, or maybe it was in April 15th, you saw the iconic burning of that free speech sign, the replica from the 60s free speech sign in Berkeley.
Yeah.
The person who burnt that sign seems like he was not from UC Berkeley, although we have seen his girlfriend at certain meetings at UC Berkeley, so we're kind of trying to narrow in on that person. And Ashton was there too, by the way, the one girl that was in the outer hallway at the UC Berkeley meeting for BAMN that was trying to like loudmouth everybody away. She actually was arrested on April 15th. But my point is that they do have these people in their movement. And even though, say, this kid was a tough inner city kid, on video, you only saw him attacking an elderly man, which shows that he's not very tough. But yeah, my point is that yes, they are reaching out to people that are not, say, soft-pampered bourgeoisie, virtue-signaling SJW white kids.
It's really interesting, though, because it's like their whole philosophy is to gain the popularity of the working class,
right.
And they're not. They're only gaining the popularity of academics.
Yes,
so
pretty much.
It would be interesting to see why their movement is failing. Because like I said, I think the Black Lives Matter movement is gaining a lot of popularity around sort of the poor black youth and some of the more gang member types of people. But Antifa, I have not really seen much of that sort of recruitment. So I'm curious. It'd be curious to try to analyze that and figure out why they're not succeeding. What is it that they're failing at?
Yeah, I mean that's certainly a thing for discussion. I mean, there's a lot to say about that. Don't know really how I could condense that down to a few minutes, so I'll just leave it at that.
No, that's a separate conversation.
Yeah,
but
totally.
It's just something I think to think about. It's something to at least just to keep in your head and sort of just swirl around while you're doing other things.
Okay, folks, that's it for this video. There will be more of this in the future. Now go find out who attacked Matthias and collect your money. Big G's, the green to feed your need, your disease, cash money. Okay, I'll stop. Sorry. Please make sure you are subscribed to my channel. Even if you think you are subscribed, make sure you are subscribed. YouTube does unsubscribe people. Make sure that you have that notification bell clicked. Subscribe to me on BitChute before I get kicked off YouTube. BitChute is a lot like YouTube, but without the censorship or ads. Follow me on Minds and Gab before I get kicked off Twitter and or Facebook, but follow me on those platforms too, please. Thanks for watching, folks. Peace for the peaceful, tough love, equality of opportunity, not of outcome, and freedom for those who respect the freedom of others. See you next time.